Doktor, regarding the assignment untuk short answer tu, okay, saya dah answer, tapi saya answer dekat kolom box tu, Doktor.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, thank you, Doktor.
Alright. Alright. Selamat petang. Assalamualaikum. Salam sejahtera. So kita boleh continue the next topics. So I would say this class is the last class kita teori, and then after hari raya kita akan go for the midterm, and then saya sangat galakkan midterm dijawab waktu kelas lah. So in other way, melainkan yang terkesan dengan ada beberapa isu, so boleh dijawab di luar waktu kelas lah. So kita assign by 21st April nanti. So hopefully everything okay lah. Alright. So we would like continue about the health environment risk assessment. So last week pun saya telah dijemput oleh UPM untuk share beberapa isu in term of diorang nak buat program baru. So by right sebenarnya in OSH field kita ada macam-macam field yang lain. Contohnya kita ada Occupational Health, OH, kita ada Environmental Health, EH, kita ada IH, Industrial Hygiene, dan kita juga ada Environmental. So sekarang ni yang menjadi tumpuan adalah OSH, yang mana diorang cuba bind in. OSH purposely sekarang duduk dalam group of management. Kalau dulu diorang OSH duduk di bawah science, applied science. So dah berbeza MQA punya arrangement. So in other way, for Uni Razak sebenarnya purposely program ini adalah untuk memberikan you all the next level of management lah. So ini bukan untuk kompetensi, tetapi ini adalah untuk the higher level of education lah. Alright. So kita akan tengok berkaitan dengan CHRA. So assessment arising from the use of the chemical. So objective, state at least 2 purpose of assessment, list at least 3 objective of assessment, explain at least 2 assessment concept, discuss briefly the assessment process, purpose of assessment, concept of assessment, content of assessment, method of conducting assessment. Alright. So CHRA terletak di bawah Use Regulation 2000, Occupational Safety and Health Act 1994. Untuk makluman semua juga, minggu lepas Menteri Sumber Manusia YB Steven Sim dah bersetuju dan telah menandatangani pewartaan akta yang mana ia akan mula kuatkuasakan bermula Jun 2024. Cuma a part of grace period, bila masa dia nak full swing mungkin 6 bulan dan sebagainya, kita akan tengok kemudian lah. Tapi by Jun 1 June 2024 kita dah guna pakai akta OSHA yang baru. Alright. So use of standard of exposure and chemical hazardous to health, Regulation 2000 applicable start April 4 April 2000. So legal requirement of CHRA Regulation 9, assessment of risk of health. An employer shall not carry out any work which may expose or is likely to expose any employee to any chemical hazardous to health unless he has made a written assessment of the risk created by the chemical to the health of the employee. The general purpose of the CHRA is to protect the health and employee who may be exposed to the chemical hazardous to health at work by enable management to make decision on the appropriate control measure, induction and training, exposure monitoring and health surveillance. So the specific objective of assessment: identify the hazard posed by chemical use, evaluate the degree of exposure, inhalation, skin absorption and ingestion, evaluate the adequacy of the existing control measure, conclude of the significance of health risk, recommend further control measure to prevent or the reduce risk. So dalam OSH kita ada beberapa type of risk assessment. Contohnya untuk ergonomik kita ada ergonomic risk assessment. Untuk physical hazard kita ada HIRAC. Untuk chemical kita ada CHRA. So ada pelbagai risk assessment dan dia very specific kepada bidang masing-masing lah. Alright, seterusnya regulation 11, assessment to be carried out by an assessor. The employer shall ensure that any assessment carried out pursuant to the part is conducted by the assessor. Assessor means an employee or any other person appointed by the employer and registered with the Director General to carry out assessment of the risk to health. So antara buat in-house ataupun buat outsource, tak kisahlah mana-mana, tetapi dia mestilah berdaftar dengan Director General dan juga boleh buat assessment lah. Review assessment, the assessment carried out under the regulation 9 shall be reviewed if there has been significant change in the work to the which the assessment relate. More than 5 years has elapsed since the last assessment or directed by the Director General, Deputy Director General or the Director of OSH. So ni kalau DOSH maklumkan, kena laksanakan lah. So antara ada signifikan terhadap perubahan kerja ataupun dah lebih 5 tahun ataupun ada arahan daripada DOSH lah. So recommended practice: deciding the assessor, get the information about the chemical, work and work practice, divide into the work unit, determine degree of hazard, evaluate exposure. Right. Seterusnya, access adequacy of the control measure, conclude the assessment, identify action to be taken, reporting the assessment, review the assessment, dan CHRA antara risk assessment yang wajib dihantar kepada DOSH, sama juga dengan NOISE dan sebagainya. Purpose of the assessment: to enable decision to be made on the suitable control measure, worker training needs, monitoring and health surveillance needs that are required to protect the health of the worker who are exposed to the chemical hazards to health at the workplace. Assessing the risk of the group of worker ataupun kita boleh panggil juga work unit with the similar risk at the workplace should include the following consideration: identity and form of the chemical being used or released at the workplace, health hazard, method and level of exposure, existing control measure and their effectiveness. So biasanya kalau kita rujuk kepada work unit ni, kerja yang sama. Contohnya kalau dekat tempat kerja kita ada beberapa unit, contohnya welding dekat ada hot work, welding dan sebagainya. So kita boleh katakan welding is one of work unit lah. Kita kira satu je. Tak kisahlah dia welding dekat department mana satu pun, so dia tetap welding lah. So seterusnya, concept of assessment: identify chemical hazard, assess the level of exposure, assess the adequacy of the existing control measure, summarize risk significance, recommend suitable or the additional control measure necessarily. Should fulfill 2 basic criteria: similar work task dan juga same chemical ataupun same material. So worker in the unit are doing the similar task, potential for the same type of exposure. Contohnya untuk welding kita ada beberapa orang welder. Should be sepatutnya dia akan mengalami benda yang sama lah. And then mungkin juga same the chemical, worker in the unit are exposed to the same chemical hazards to the health, potential the same chemical exposure. Kalau dia dah buat satu tempat tu ada exposure of chemical, so means that satu tempat tu memang akan menerima exposure yang sama lah. Hazard is the potential of the chemical to cause injury or the harm to the health. Example, natrium cyanide is the hazardous as a small quantity is capable of causing death. Nitric acid is hazardous as is capable to destroying part of the body upon contact. So kena tahulah a part of, sebab tu bila kita handle dengan chemical, safety data sheet sangat-sangat penting. Concept of exposure is when there is a contact with a chemical, whether through the inhalation, ingestion, or contact with the eye or skin, either for the short or the long duration. For example, a quarry worker is exposed to the silica dust via inhalation as he is constantly inhalation stone dust. Probability of the injury or the harm to the health due to use of chemical hazardous to the health. Risk of the person contracting silicosis is high if he is constantly exposed to the stone dust containing high percentage of silica, and for the long duration without using proper respirator protection. So risiko untuk berlakunya silikosis ni adalah dia ada scar pada paru-paru yang boleh menyebabkan ketidakmampuan paru-paru untuk berfungsi dengan baik lah. So, dan boleh menyebabkan kanser dan sebagainya. Alright, so risk equation, risk equal to how multiply by severity and multiply by quantity. How refer the route of the entry of the chemical in the body. Severity refer to the toxicity of the chemical. Quantity refer to the quantity of the chemical entering or in contact with the body. So risk equal to hazard multiply by exposure. So risk equation 5 scale value. So defining the 5 scale value for the hazard, HR, exposure is ER, and risk is RR. RR equal to square root of HR multiplied by ER, ataupun risk equal to HR kali dengan yang ni bukan RR is HR kali dengan ER. So where the HR is 1/5, ER is 1/5, and the RR is 1/5. So kita boleh ambil kira 1 to 5, 1 is low, 3 is moderate, and the 5 is high. Content of assessment under regulation 9(2), an assessment should take into the consideration potential risk, method and step of the chemical use, health hazard criteria, level of exposure, risk to health. Next, control measure for the accident release, necessity for the worker exposure monitoring, necessity for the health surveillance, 10 necessity for the worker training and retaining. Potential risk, situation where there is a possible of the worker falling ill or the sustaining injury from the normal use, handling, storing, transporting or disposal, or accident or abnormal release of the chemical. For example, chemical spray, cloud of the dust, bad work practice, worker complain of the symptom or disease. Method and procedure for the use or handling of chemical. Method of the handling, manual or automatic, type of process, close or open, work procedure, standard operating procedure, safe operating procedure, health hazard criteria, physical form, chemical use or produce, toxicity data, effect on the health, is it acute or chronic? So acute ni is kesan serta-merta, chronic adalah kesan daripada exposure yang berpanjangan. So for example, hazard rating, no serious health effect, hazard rate 1, hazard rate 2, minor or reversible, systemic in reversible upon end of the exposure, hazard rate 3, moderate or reversible, not too serious, will not cause serious injury or the disability. Seterusnya, hazard rate 4, life threatening, permanent disability, reversible, serious systemic, serious disability may cause death. So yang terakhir, hazard rate 5, for the local and systemic. So local ni is kepada person, systemic kepada kumpulan lah, kepada kawasan yang lebih besar. Exposure to low dosage may cause serious disability or death. Level of exposure, so it depends on route of the entry. Mungkin inhalation, mungkin skin absorption, or mungkin juga ingestion. So quantitative assessment by sampling of airborne contaminant, and then boleh jadi juga qualitative assessment. So for the job observation, measurement of frequency, duration and intensity of exposure, dan juga boleh datang daripada professional input. So magnitude of rating, so ada 1 sehingga 5. So magnitude rating 1, time weighted average TWA or the maximum exposure limit, less than 0.1 multiplied by PEL. For the rating 2, 0.5 to less by 0.5 multiplied PEL. So whatever it is, kita punya penanda aras adalah daripada PEL lah. So sebab chemical ada PEL yang berbeza-beza, that's why kita punya rating pun is depends pada PEL lah. So magnitude rating 3, 0.5 to the PEL. For the 4, PEL to the less than 3 multiplied by PEL. For the 5 rating, more than 3, more and same 3 multiplied by PEL. Manakala frequency rating 1 to 5, 1 is less than 1 a year, improbable, probable. 2, more than 1 time exposure for the year, remote. 3, more than 1 time exposure per month, occasionally. 4, more than once a year, probable. And 5, exposure potential is once or more per shift or the per day, ataupun kita boleh panggil dia frequent lah. So kalau dah hari-hari, kita boleh panggil dia dengan rating 5. So manakala duration rating is depends 1 to 5 juga. So 1 is percentage, not more than 12.5%. For the rating 2, 12.5% to 25%. Rating 3, 25 to 50%. 4, 50 to 87.5%. And 5, more than 87.5%. So bila kita mapping kan, kita akan dapat table magnitude versus dengan frequency rating. So kita akan boleh dapat macam ni lah. Alright. Content of assessment, the next is risk to the health. Take into consideration hazard and exposure in the both normal and emergency circumstance. Is the risk significant or insignificant? Significant risk situation may result in high risk to the health for the worker or exposed person. For example, may result in irritation, corrosion, harmful or toxicity. If the result is an insignificant risk, situation does not result in a high risk to the health. So maksudnya, so kalau dapat dia punya insignificant risk, so baguslah. Okay, mostly bila tadi kita dah ada metric, exposure versus dengan hazard rating. So normally ada 3 area, insufficient risk, significant risk dan juga significant risk category 1 dan juga category 2 lah. So category 2 ni yang mana rating dia semua 5-5-5. Alright. So control measure, existing control measure, apa-apa hal pun kita akan tengok keadaan semasa, adakah ada control measure ataupun tak ada, adequacy of the existing control measure, suitability, use of the effectiveness, maintenance, additional suggestion or the recommendation. Dalam safety kita tak boleh nak pukul rata about the control measure, tak ada. Kalau ada tak efektif is another things, tapi kalau dia memang langsung tak ada, memang teruk lah. Kadang-kadang contohnya dari segi fire extinguisher untuk kebakaran, ada dengan tak ada satu benda yang berbeza, ada tapi tidak berfungsi satu lagi benda yang berbeza lah. Right. So measure for the accident exposure, probability of accidental exposure, mungkin spillage, leakage ataupun accident, control measure, emergency response plan, ERP, necessity of the worker monitoring program, why necessary, what chemical and in what form should be monitored, who should be monitored, frequency of monitoring, which sampling and analysis method should be adopted. So necessity for the health surveillance, why necessary, exposure to who, to what, who should be examined, who should be conduct surveillance, requirement for the health surveillance, necessity for the worker train and retrain, who should be trained, what type of training is necessary, is it level induction or specific or specialized, or for the refresher, frequency of training, content of training, assessment conclusion. So mostly biasanya akan ada dalam conclusion kita akan letak biasanya kita akan bermula dengan insignificant risk C1, and then kita akan sambung dengan significant risk, adequate control measure, inadequate control measure, insufficient information, dan last kali unconfirmed exposure. So normally assessment process ada 10 step of the conducting risk assessment. Yang pertama, identify the assessor, gather information about the chemical, work and the work practice, divide into work units, determine degree of hazard, evaluate exposure, assess the adequacy of control measure, conclude the assessment, identify action to be taken, reporting the assessment, review the assessment. So kalau katalah kita punya flowchart, so bermula daripada identify assessor and then gather information. Kalau kita jumpa insufficient information, kita akan letak daripada C4 lah, and then divide into the work units, determine the degree of hazard. So kalau non-hazardous chemical, kita letak pada C1, average exposure, unconfirmed exposure, kita letak C5, and then assess adequacy of the control measure, conduct assessment. So insignificant risk C1, significant risk adequate, significant risk inadequate. So identify action to be taken, reporting assessment dan review assessment. So yang pertama, step yang pertama, decide the assessor. Kenapa penting decide the assessor? An assessment team to be set up, headed by the registered assessor and assisted by the one or more of the following team member where appropriate, the company safety and health officer or the safety engineer. Second, company doctor, probability register is for the occupational health doctor, company process or the chemical engineer or the chemist, and experienced and knowledgeable member of the safety and health committee, and industrial or occupational health nurse. So ini antara yang perlu ada dalam team lah. So step 2, gathering information, identify a chemical hazardous to the health found in the workplace and to gather information about the work and work practice involving chemical hazardous to health. So information apa yang kita nak collect? So chemical hazardous to health use or the release, layout plan of the work area, process flowchart, employee of at risk, equipment, control equipment design and maintenance, accident and incident, monitoring record, health surveillance program, training program, personal protective equipment program, chemical hazardous to the health use the release in the workplace, list of chemical in the workplace and their harmful effect, the nature and the degree of exposure to the chemical, exposure standard and performance criteria against which is to evaluate the risk to the health and recommended control measure for the chemical substance. So this one is contoh lah daftar bahan kimia berbahaya. So sangat-sangat penting kita simpan chemical register untuk pastikan kita punya kawasan kita tahulah apa chemical yang ada sebenarnya. And then chemical hazardous to health use the release in the workplace. So for example ada list of chemical, contohnya yang ini dekat storage of chemical, dia ada dioxin, source of information, CSDS. So sekarang dah tak ada CSDS, SDS. So classification of hazard very harmful. Risk crisis. So ini biasanya kita akan rujuk kepada SDS lah. Hazard rating 3. So kita ada juga acetaldehyde. So juga harmful. Dan kita ada carbon disulfate. So very toxic. So kena lah. Right. Step 3, divide into the work unit. A work unit must fulfill 2 basic requirements, work similarity and then lagi satu similarity with the respect to the hazardous agent. So work similarity means that worker in the work unit must perform the similar task. Contohnya kalau ada lab, ada beberapa teknik, kita panggil dia lab technologies lah, ataupun kita panggil dia pembantu makmal dan sebagainya. So dia akan perform benda yang sama walaupun dekat tempat yang berbeza. So next, similarity with the respect to the hazardous agent. Worker using or are exposed to the same chemical hazardous to the health. So kalau katalah berlakunya pencemaran, kalau katalah berkongsi ventilation system, so dekat satu kawasan tu akan dapat expose yang sama lah. Seterusnya, step 4, determine the degree of hazard, identify all the chemical hazardous to the health to which the work unit is exposed to the either form the chemical used or handled by the work unit or chemical release from the work activity. So contohnya chemical classification, source by label, SDS, ICS. So mostly kita refer sekarang ni SDS lah. So mungkin juga boleh information berkaitan dengan health effect, LC50, LD50. So dulu ada chemical safety data sheet dan juga material safety data sheet. So sekarang dia dah jadi safety data sheet. Mungkin juga ada makluman daripada poisoning center, chemical safety literature dan sebagainya. Risk verification, so label, SDS, ICS card. So ini contoh hazard rating. Health effect 5, local injury to the skin, eye, mucous membrane of the sufficient severity to the threatened life by the single exposure. Severe irreversible effect, example central nervous system effect, kidney necrosis, linear lesion, anemia or paralyzed after the single expose. So very toxic chemical, LD50 less to the 25 milligram per kilogram in oral, LD50 less than 50 milligram per kilogram for the skin, LC50 less than 0.5 milligram per liter. No human carcinogen, mutagen, and teratogen. Category 1 carcinogen, mutagen, and teratogen. So ini kita boleh tengok lah. Effect, very toxic, 5 toxic, 4 harmful, 3 corrosive, 4 or 3, it depends, acute or chronic. So yang ni irritant, acute, rating 3 or 2, sensitizing, acute, 3, autocarcinogenic, mungkin boleh 5, 4 or 3, mutagenic, teratogenic. So untuk level 4 contohnya, toxic, for the local injury to the skin, eye, or mucous membrane of sufficient severity to the cause permanent impairment, disfigurement, or irreversible change from the single or repeated exposure. So kalau systemic, very serious physical or the health impairment by repeated or the prolonged exposure. So mungkin very corrosive. So kalau kita tengok corrosive, dia 4 maksimum. Mungkin juga kalau toxic chemical, dia boleh pergi LD50, LD50 skin, oral dan juga sebagainya. So probably human carcinogen, mutagen, teratogen based on the animal study. Category 2 carcinogen, mutagen, and teratogen. Kalau tengok carcinogen, so dia merujuk kepada yang 4 lah, R45-2. So biasanya kita, ujian ini berdasarkan kalau 5 ni yang mana tested to human. Memang tahulah human boleh kena carcinogen, mutagen atau teratogen. Untuk yang 4 boleh jadi based on animal study lah, kita test kepada haiwan. So manakala step 4 continue, contohnya name of the chemical and indicator ingredient. So petrol premix 3, rasanya sekarang dah tak ada dah kot premix 3 ni. So physical form dia adalah liquid. Source of information kita dapat SDS, classification of hazard, toxic. So dia dalam petrol premix 3 ada benzene, ada N-hexane, toluene dan xylene. So skin notation SK. So hazard rating 4, sama juga dengan WD-40. So classification of hazard is toxic. So dalam WD-40 aerosol ada aliphatic petroleum, ada petroleum base, carbon dioxide 15 to 25. So dia dalam bentuk aerosol. So yang ini share mula di extra 15W40. Ini adalah minyak enjin. So dalam minyak enjin ada kalsium sulfate, sensitizing. So dia cuma dia tak toxic ataupun inilah. So hazard rating dia 3. So may cause sensitization by the skin contact. Mungkin ada kegatalan, mungkin kemerahan dan sebagainya lah. Right. Step 5, evaluate exposure, assess the exposure of the work unit to the each of the chemical hazardous to the health. Use or handle it by the exposed to the work unit and the same time assess the adequacy of the existing control measure. So seterusnya, evaluate the exposure. Important consideration in the assessment of the exposure in the workplace it depends on degree of exposure, who is exposed, how and what is circumstance in the exposure, frequency of exposure, duration of exposure, and intensity or the magnitude of exposure. Other factors such as training, information of employees, monitoring of the exposure, and health surveillance. Estimation of the degree exposure is primarily based on this parameter: frequency of exposure, F, duration of exposure notified by D, and intensity of the magnitude of exposure signed by M. So frequency rating 5:1. So kalau 5 frequent, 4 probable, 3 occasional, 2 remote, and 1 improbable. So is 5 potential exposure, 1 or more time per shift of per day. 4 exposure greater than 1 time per week. Next, 3 is exposure greater than 1 time per month. 2 exposure greater than 1 time per year. 1 exposure less than 1 per year. Maksudnya kalau 1 ni mungkin 2 tahun sekali, 3 tahun sekali. Jadi macam itulah. So duration rating is depends on the percent of work hour. So rating 5:1. So total exposure duration per week, TD, is equal to number of exposure per week multiplied by average duration for the exposure. So rating 5, more than 87.5% means that 7 hours per shift or more than 35 hours per week. 4, 50 to 87.5% means that 4 to 7 hours per shift or 20 to 30 hours per week. 25 to 50%, 2 to 4 hours per shift, or 10 to 20 hours per week. 2, 15, 12.5 to 25, 1 or 2 hours per shift, or 5 to 10 hours per week. 1 less than 12.5, so means that 1 hour per 8 shift or the 5 hours per week. So ini exposure berapa lama? Exposure bergantung kepada jumlah masa bekerja lah. So seterusnya, intensity of magnitude of exposure, M, as a qualitative estimation of the magnitude of exposure, degree of chemical release on the present. So degree, low, medium, and high. So low is low or little release into the air, no contamination of the air, clothing, and work surface with the chemical capable of skin absorption or cause irritation or corrosion. Medium, moderate release such as solvent with the medium drying time in uncovered container to expose the work environment. Detach odor of the chemical with the odor threshold exceeding the PEL. Evidence of the contamination of air, clothing, and work surface with the chemical capable of the skin absorption or causing irritation of the corrosion. And then high substantial release such as solvent with the fast drying time in uncovered container, spray or the dust cloud in poorly ventilated area, chemical with high rate in evaporation exposed to the work environment, strong odor of the chemical with the odor threshold exceeding next, gross the contamination of air, clothing, and the work surface with the chemical capable of the skin absorption of causing irritation or the corrosion. And then step 6, assess the adequacy of the control measure. The adequacy of the existing control measure is assessed by inspecting the existing control measure, checking record by and sampling biological monitoring, and checking record on the inspection, testing, and examination of control equipment. Step 7, conclude the assessment. Risk in the likelihood that substance will cause adverse health effect or the illness in the condition of its use, the health usually increase with the severity of the hazard, the amount of use, and the duration and frequency exposed. Step 7, conclude the assessment. Risk is how multiplied by how bad and multiplied by how much. So which propose the health risk is a function of three things: the likelihood of exposure or contact with the chemical is first how, and the potential of the chemical to cause harm or its hazard is second how bad, and the last, the how much is the degree of exposure to the chemical. So normally for the risk assessment kita akan rating 1/5 lah, kita tak akan buat 1/10 dan sebagainya. So commonly kita akan 1 is very low risk, 2 is low risk, 3 is medium risk, 4 is high risk, and 5 is very high risk. So this one is risk metric, hazard rating multiplied by exposure rating ER. So RR equal to 1 is sampai RR equal to 2 is risk not significant, and then category next is risk significant category 1, and the high risk is risk significant category 2. So risk decision it depends on adequacy and conclusion. Risk notification, nothing, conclusion in C1. Risk significant, adequate, C2, not adequate, C3. Insufficient information, C4. Uncertain exposure, C5. Identify action to be taken. For the risk decision, C1, the action required and current assessment and review assessment every 5 years, or when there is a changes or is directed by DOSH. Step 8 is identify action to be taken. For the risk decision C2, the action required are determine precaution to maintain control and minimize changes of the high exposure, determine additional measure, identify measure, procedure and equipment to prevent or control any accident, determine of the monitoring of health surveillance is required, and review assessment every 5 years where there is a change in the directed or as the directed DOSH. So seperti yang kita dah study sebelum-sebelum ni, untuk noise kita juga simpan untuk 5 tahun, tapi untuk medical surveillance kita akan simpan selama 30 tahun lah. Alright, identify action to be taken. For the risk decision C3, the action required, identify and implement immediate measure and a procedure, identify measure, procedure, and equipment to prevent, control any accident, establish the need to stop the process, begin review of the longer terms control requirement, re-evaluate exposure, determine if the monitoring or the health surveillance is required, and then determine if the training and retrain is required, and review assessment every 5 years, or when there is a change in or as directed by DOSH. So next, for the decision C4, the action required obtain additional information and specialized advice and implement good work practice. And the for this decision C5, action required conduct a more detailed assessment and specialized advice and implement good work practice. So untuk health kita ada 2, satu CHRA dan satu lagi indoor air quality. Alright, kita continue the next second assessment for the health is one indoor air quality. So for the indoor air quality ada beberapa prasyarat yang kita akan tengok kemudian. So it's a good sebenarnya memahami indoor air quality Di samping itu juga sebenarnya pun ada juga outdoor air quality tetapi tak masuk dalam kita punya scope lah. Alright. So kita akan tengok berkaitan dengan 4 sign of poor indoor air quality, problem of the indoor air quality, way to control problem and indoor air quality, explain at least 3 indoor air quality tests, state the difference between air conditioner and ventilation, state the function of the air conditioner, elaborate 2 factor of comfortability. Alright. So kita punya scope, poor indoor air quality, problem of indoor air quality, overcoming indoor air quality problems, indoor air quality tests, microorganism pollution versus indoor air quality. So general purpose of the air conditioner and the ventilation, difference between the air conditioning and ventilation, function of the air conditioning system, comfortability factor. Alright, indoor air quality, the new phenomena related to occupancy of the in a modern building, diseases arising from the occupancy in a building with the poor indoor air quality, say building syndrome dan juga type building syndrome, terusnya extremely cool or the hot temperature, low or high humidity, lack ventilation, uncomfortable weather, resistance of of an organism, existence of the toxic chemical, existence of the spore, pollen, and etc. So in the air quality problem, poor air quality can be related to the poor operation and maintenance of the air conditioning system. So for the overcoming indoor air quality problems, air conditioning system is designed according to the indoor air quality standard by ASHRAE 62 1989 dan juga ASHRAE 55 1992. So testing of the air cleaning equipment under ASHRAE 52 1992. So regular testing and the maintenance of the system, monitoring of the indoor air quality indicator. So ada beberapa peralatan yang kita akan gunakan untuk indoor air quality test. Yang pertama is about the thermometer, anemometer, gas detector, psychrometer, smoke tube, multifunction indoor air quality equipment. So antara kaedah yang kita boleh gunakan adalah measure the concentration of the carbon dioxide outside building and within a space, measure temperature, air outside building and within a space. So ini pengiraan berdasarkan ASHRAE 62 1989 for the minimum 20 CFM per person. So CFM is the rate of the external airflow, percentage of OA. OA is external airflow, is equal to percentage of external air entering the system. Sebab kalau ingat lagi masa masa PKP kita kena kurangkan penggunaan air conditioner dan juga the most important macam mana fresh air nak masuk. So sebenarnya secara relatednya secara layman disebut macam itulah, ada fresh air 25 times more, 20 kali lebih daripada fresh air dan sebagainya. Dan sebenarnya kaedah pengiraan dia adalah ni lah, OA ataupun QOA. Q is rated of the OA is external airflow dalam CFM, cubic CFM saya tak ingat detail dia, tapi merujuk kepada ASHRAE 62 1989. So seterusnya minimum of 20 CFM per person, ASHRAE 62 1989. So percentage of OA outside air is equal to percentage of external air entering the system. CRA is concentration CO2, carbon dioxide, air cycle, CSA concentration of carbon dioxide, air within area, COA concentration CO2, external air. Dia dalam satu-satu isu sebenarnya kita boleh sebut antaranya adalah indoor air quality ni kita juga mengukur carbon dioxide dalam kita punya compound. Kenapa carbon dioxide ni penting? Salah satunya adalah dia juga merupakan ejen untuk pertumbuhan ulat dan sebagainya lah. So microorganism pollution versus IAQ, microorganism in the HVAC, heating, ventilation and air conditioning. Kita jarang jumpa heating, tapi kita kat Malaysia biasa ada ventilating and conditioning lah. Tapi hakikatnya sebenarnya sistem yang kita ada tu dia juga ada kaedah heating sebenarnya. System may cause certain odor and some condition disease and allergic reaction. The problem arises when the quantity of the bacteria, fungi or virus increases due to the condition that conducive for their growth. General purpose of the air conditioning and ventilation to maintain a certain specified level of the air cleanliness and condition inside a building, temperature, airflow, and concentration. So different between air conditioning and ventilation. Air conditioning is facility and process of the treatment for the purpose cleaning, controlling temperature and humidity, maintaining a sufficient supply of the external air for the ventilation purpose. Manakala ventilation is a facility to supply sufficient external air into room or space through the nature or the mechanical method to ensure sufficient of air quantity for the usage of it occupant of or process. So ada dua lah. Kita boleh sebut ventilation is nature ventilation dan juga air conditioning ni is mechanical ventilation lah, ataupun senang kita sebut air conditioning lah. Tapi dengan syarat sebenarnya dia supply the external air for the ventilation. Kita kena tahu split unit yang ada kat rumah, yang ada kat pejabat, dia tidak membawa fresh air. Sebab tu masa PKP, masa COVID sangat-sangat bahaya kepada environment lah. Sebab apa? Dia tak ada fresh air. Berbanding dengan central unit, ada cooling tower dan sebagainya, dia ada fresh air intake. So seterusnya, function of the air conditioning to provide and maintain a created building environment to ensure the comfort and welfare of its occupant, or the efficiency of a manufacturing process, or the quality of the product in storage. So conditioning system supply a fresh air, cooling, humidification, or the dehumidification and airflow. So this one is an air conditioning system. So dia ada external air. So dia akan ada filter, ada blower, ada fan, ada cooling cycle. Dia akan masuk dalam kita punya untuk jadi air supply dalam kita punya dan dia akan supply untuk keseluruhan bilik lah. So dan menariknya untuk air conditioning system, kalau kita boleh tengok simple ni adalah dia ada intake dan dia juga ada return. So inilah yang menariknya untuk air conditioning system. Dia bukan sekadar ada intake dan juga dia ada return. Dan return dia ditambah dengan ada external air. Berbanding dengan central dengan split unit yang ada dekat rumah ataupun kat pejabat, so dia ada juga air supply dan dia juga ada return, tetapi dia tak ada external air. Alright. So comfortable environment free from the disturbance, enabling work or the recreational activity without physical or mental discomfort. So comfort factor, oxygen supply is compulsory 20 to 21%. Kenapa 20 to 21%? more than 21 dia akan jadi enrichment oksigen, sangat berbahaya dan boleh mudah untuk terbakar. Kalau rendah daripada 20, less oksigen, so dia mungkin akan banyak carbon dioxide lah. So air temperature around 60 to 65 Fahrenheit ataupun lebih kurang dalam 20 to 34 degree Celsius. Radiant temperature around 22 to 62 to 65 Fahrenheit. Relative humidity around 30 to 70%. Kenapa humidity dia tidak terlampau humidity ataupun bahasa Melayu ni kita boleh kelembapan, dia tidak terlampau lembap dan dia tidak terlampau kering. So kalau dia terlampau kering, dia boleh menyebabkan elektrostatik. Dia terlampau lembap, dia boleh menyebabkan pembiakan kepada bakteria dan sebagainya. And then airflow around 150 millimeter per second or the 30 feet per minute. And then ada juga amount of clothing, physical activity, ada smell, airborne contaminant, microorganism, vibration and noise, lighting. So ada cabaran berkaitan dengan vibration dan juga noise. Indoor air quality importance, build up contaminant, odor, ill health, for example sick-burden syndrome, other disease, for example legionnaires, and then ada juga isu discomfort, ada juga isu loss of productivity. Saya pernah pergi kilang pembuatan makanan segera, yang mana pekerja kena berada dalam kawasan bekerja pada suhu -4. Kenapa -4? Sebab kita nak elakkan daripada bakteria merebak, membiak dan sebagainya. So macam mana nak selesaikan -4 ni memang ada kaedah yang perlu digunakan lah untuk pastikan semua pekerja boleh conduct work with the -4. And then contaminant in the air quality. So ada issue on tobacco, sapi saokok, ada bau-bau rokok dan sebagainya. Furniture and fabric, structure, concrete, paint, adhesive, insulation, personal or domestic care product, ground, outside air, office appliance, for example photocopier, toner solution. Untuk makluman, photocopier juga adalah producer kepada ozon. So ozon bagus ataupun tak, so it depends kepada keadaan. Ozon sangat bagus untuk melindungi, tetapi apa yang berlaku dalam kerangka ozon sangat berbahaya kalau ada hazard exposure. And then ada juga water type of contaminant, physical, mungkin ada isu radon plus radioactive daughter. So ini biasanya datang daripada chemical dan sebagainya lah, radon. So ada juga isu biological, virus from the URTI. So URTI ni adalah singkatan kepada penyakit sakit batuk, sesama, demam, batuk dan sesama. So bila batuk sesama tu, bakteria boleh terbebas. Bacterial, fungal spore, animal, then there's mite, excreta, and then ada isu chemical, oxides of the CNNS. C ni is carbon, N is nitrogen, S adalah sulfate, there's VOC, volatile compound, VOC, PAH, metal particle, MMF, dan juga asbestos. So ada isu daripada oxidize of the carbon, nitrogen and sulfur, CNS tadi. So cigarette, combustion, outside air. And then ada juga isu VOC, volatile organic compound, means that from the carbon. Kita punya carpet, kita punya fabric, adhesive, solvent, paint, cleaning agent, wax, cigarette, combustion sauce and toner. So untuk maklumat, volatile organic compound ataupun yang ada carbon, dia juga merupakan agent carcinogen agent. So bukanlah tak boleh pakai kapet, tapi kalau boleh kita kurangkan lah. So lately ni kalau tengok dah tak banyak pejabat nak pakai kapet, more on pakai tile dan sebagainya. So seterusnya formaldehyde, foam plastik, carbonless copy paper, particle board, plywood, fumigants, ada juga polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbon, so for example toluene, benzene, turpentine. So health effect of the IAQ contaminant, odor, sick burden syndrome. Normally kalau IAQ ni kita akan refer kepada sick burden syndrome dan juga ada tight burden syndrome. So bila sick burden syndrome ni means that ada symptom of nose or eye irritation, sore throat, headache, stiffness, allergic nose and etc. Upper respiratory tract infection. Ni yang kita sebut URTI tadi. Upper respiratory tract infection, batuk, sesama, allergic lung disease, mungkin boleh jadi asma, hypersensitive pneumonitis. So assessment biasanya kita akan lihat kepada carbon dioxide level, measure makeup outside air should be less than 1000 ppm part per million, normally around 300 to 350 ppm, dan juga total volatile organic compound TVOC, gas chromatography on samples. Kenapa penting VOC ni? Kalau boleh memang less ataupun tak ada VOC, because of dia boleh produce unwanted gases sebenarnya. So source of contaminants, carpet, furnishing, for example, datang daripada VOC, particle board, laminates, formaldehyde, cigarette, various photocopier, ozone, cooling tower, duct. Mungkin dalam ducting kita tu salur aircon tu tak bersih dan sebagainya. So bakteria, fungi, seingat saya ada beberapa fasiliti yang pernah ada masalah dari segi bakteria pada ducting lah. Contohnya hospital dekat Kulim, hospital kat Kulim ataupun hospital kat Kedah, saya tak ingat. Hospital Tuanku Surabaya, lagi satu hospital kat dekat Kulai, dan lately ni ada isu dekat UKM sebenarnya, bangunan ada bakteria. So indoor air quality survey, fresh air, oxygen, more than 19.5%, air temperature approximately 21 to 26 degrees Celsius, air movement 0.2 to 0.4 milli per second, humidity 70%, list of source of the contaminant, compare performance, design criteria, check maintenance of cooling tower, check the location of air intake, the contaminated water is to be contained and disposed of the hazardous waste. So di samping itu juga sebenarnya memang ada code of practice untuk indoor air quality, so yang telah dikeluarkan oleh DOSH pada tahun 2005. So dalam tu ada introduction, ada assessment of indoor air quality, control of the indoor air quality, complaint and investigation, information and instruction and training, and record keeping. So di samping itu juga ada isu dari segi macam mana kita nak menjaga produce of odor yang ada ataupun hazardous yang ada, mungkin boleh jadi feed slot hood. Ni lebih kurang macam local exhaust ventilation, ada juga slot hood. So ada draft table, ini fungsi asasnya sama macam LEV lah, cumanya dalam bentuk yang berbeza-beza. So hood, the initial point of the entry of contaminant in the local exhaust ventilation ataupun LEV system is at the hood. Walau bagaimanapun sebenarnya hood ni akan sama pada chimney. So chimney ada dua perundangan yang berkuat kuasa, ada DOSH dan juga ada Environmental Quality Act. Depends lah. Its purpose is to control emission where the contaminant either captured, retained, or they received by the flowing air current. The hood constitutes the most important part of the system. A poor hood design may result in a contaminant not being trapped by the hood, no matter how well built the duct and arrested how large the fan that has been installed in the system. Poor hood design may also result in a large airflow or the increases turbulence of the or other airflow resistance, which would require larger fan size and speed, which ultimately will increase the operating cost of the system. Ada beberapa pusat pengajian yang fail testing LEV, yang mana ada tindakan daripada MQA dan sebagainya, sebab LEV ni sangat-sangat penting. Bila LEV, dia akan berkait dengan chemical exposure. So kalau dia tidak mampu dibebaskan, sangat-sangat membahayalah. Sebab kena faham ada chemical yang dia lebih berat daripada udara, dan dia juga ada yang lebih ringan daripada udara sebenarnya. Sebab tu kalau ingat kes Sungai Kim Kim, sekolah tu ada 3 tingkat. Tingkat 2 dan 3 tak boleh guna sebab chemical yang ataupun gas yang terhasil, gas toksik yang terhasil tu lebih ringan daripada udara biasa. Jadi dia akan terbang lah. So issue in term of hood, type of hood, as enclosure hood, captured hood and receiving hood. So ada macam-macam local exhaust ventilation, ada contaminant rising the hot process. So ada macam-macam bentuk local exhaust ventilation lah. So ada juga ada component of fan, so macam mana sedut dan sebagainya. So the most important adalah untuk local exhaust ventilation sebenarnya ada kaedah pengiraan berapa kuat vacuum ataupun motor tu sedut. So maksudnya contoh ini adalah dia punya kawasan untuk ventilate. So dalam tempoh 2 inci sebanyak 1000 CFM is needed. So kemampuan dia untuk sedut lah. And then kalau 4 inci 400 CFM is needed. It depends pada proses. So ini juga macam mana. So sebenarnya local exhaust ventilation ni, siapa yang ada hood kat rumah tu dia tak banyak beza sebenarnya. Cumanya lately ni ada pula hood yang tak ada ducting, tak tahu dia lepaskan ke mana. So dia cuma filter dan dia akan contain minyak lah. So adalah lebih baik sebenarnya dia dilepaskan keluar lah. Okay. So two type of ventilation, from the fan, fan off, ni kita punya chimney lah. So macam mana disedut ke atas. Alright, we continue the last topic about the occupational mental health. So the good topics for saya boleh cakap benda yang sangat penting untuk for your future lah. So in other way sebenarnya bila we talk about stress, so ada macam-macam isu in terms of mental health sebenarnya. So lately ni tak kisahlah dia baru kerja ke, dia dah lama kerja ke, dia kerja tinggi ke rendah dan sebagainya, isu the mental health memang sangat-sangat membimbangkan sebenarnya. So that's why Uni Razak memang minta part of mental health dimasukkan salah satu topik lah. So mental workload, so state the 4 situation that place mental workload on the worker, state the definition of the mental workload, explain this one strategy to reduce mental workload. Saya tak dapat nafi sebenarnya sedar ataupun tidak, ada di antara kita yang memang ada masalah mental health. Adakah dia ignore ataupun dia memang reflect kepada ni lah. So scope for this topic is situation that place mental workload on the worker, definition of the mental workload, signal identification theory, strategy to reduce mental workload, guideline for the design a work system related to the visual and control equipment. So what is the mental workload? The mental stress and strain of the being busy at work. Excessive the mental workload often lead to the error. Mental workload is important in the operation of safety critical system. So example of the mental tasks, vigilance, problem recognition and diagnosis, planning and action, prioritization, remembering to do things, rapid integration, coping with the unexpected. So mental workload in the real life, not a new ideas. Pilot, GPs, design team. This example is shown different fact of the mental workload. What is the consequence of the high mental workload in this situation? So responsibility to the maintain in the high of the awareness for the long duration, necessity to make decision related to the bigger responsibility of the ensure product quality and safety and health of the worker and workplace. Intermittent one of the connection due to the monotonous work, reduce interaction with the other worker due to the isolated work area. Saya banyak berbincang juga dengan lately ni kita tengoklah a part of untuk saya boleh cakap yang berumur 35 tahun ke atas, a part of monotonous work ni memang satu isu lah. Kita fokus kepada satu benda je. Unfortunately sebenarnya budak-budak yang lately ni yang mana baru lepas SPM, yang baru lepas grad universiti dan sebagainya, mereka lebih fokus kepada monotonous work. That's why gig ekonomi banyak terbentuk berdasarkan monotonous work. Contohnya, dia suka buat satu-satu kerja je. Contohnya, dia memang suka edit gambar, dia memang suka data entry, so dia very focus on that type of work. Dia berbeza dengan generasi X, Y, so dia lebih fokus kepada creativity dan juga multiple task lah. So definition of the mental workload, difference between the capability of the individual to process information obtained with the requirement of the job. Not easy. A working condition might be the real and perceived increase in the task difficulty caused by any factor that impair decision making, planning and reasoning, and other mental tasks concerned with the job in hand. Measuring mental workload, so kita sebenarnya ada macam-macam tools. So yang popular sekarang ni ada KKM is DAS31. So ada juga yang lain-lain. So benda yang penting sebenarnya bila kita nak measure mental workload is task analysis, secondary task, physiological correlates, task performance over the busy time, subjective rating, measure mental workload over the busy time. So signal identification theory, a theory that may be used in a situation that there are two varying situations that may be difficult to differentiate. So 4 types of decision may be made. Hit state the existence of the signal when the signal exists. False alarm state the existence of the signal when the signal does not exist. Miss state the non-existence of the signal when the signal exists. Correct rejection state the non-existence of a signal when the signal does not exist. So this one is signal identification theory. So bila orang tu tak boleh fokus, so dia akan hit walaupun tak ada isyarat dan sebagainya lah. Alright, so the factor that impact upon operator mental workload, skill level, operating rules and procedure, operating conditions, staffing level, task allocation, organizational expectation, Conceptual suitability refer to the individual capability to the translate available codes and symbol. Movement suitability refer to the relationship between the control movement display on screen and the feedback system that being displayed on the control. Space stability related to the physical layout of the control equipment and respectively display. So strategize to reduce mental workload, movement stability. So ini antara tools yang kita boleh guna, right? So physical layout, important principle, stress the necessity to the place essential component within the range of the reach ability, depends on the expert assessment, principle of repetitive use, refer the relationship between the movement on the display and control equipment and feedback system being displayed or controlled. Functional principle, give emphasis of the arrangement of the component based on their respective function. Example, clustering of the control equipment, machinery, and visual equipment related to the work operating system. Network principle related the physical arrangement of the control equipment and their respective display. So worker performance with the regard for principle of physical layout arrangement. So ada beberapa ni lah. Level of application of principle, low, moderate and high. So guideline for the design of this work system related to the visual and control equipment. So first priority, main visual task. Second priority, control task related to the main visual task. Third priority, visual control relationship. Fourth priority, arrangement of the component to be used in a network. Fourth priority, placement a frequency use component in a suitable position. Sixth priority, consistent with the internal and or external system layout. So example of the mental workload, contohnya driving car, when a learning to drive, variation of familiar route while they're trying to have a telephone conversation, digital versus analog speedometer, car running badly in a heavy traffic, driving van through ice mountain road, and then seterusnya berkaitan dengan health stress. So occupational health stress. So definition of occupational stress, source of the stress at the workplace, side effect of the occupational stress, practical method of the reduce stress at the workplace. So definition of occupational stress, who is at the risk of occupational stress, stress reaction, effect of the stress to the organization, source of stress at work, stress reducing method, action plan to reduce stress. So employee perception towards stress, we do not have stress here. Stress is something that cannot be avoided in our business. If you cannot overcome it, you will not achieve the target. So it is not our fault. Employees bring their stress to the workplace. We cannot do nothing about it. So ini yang biasa employee sebut lah. So masalah stres. Nak buat macam mana? Memang mana-mana tempat pun ada stres dan sebagainya. So fact, stress result in a mental suffering for the worker. Stress is detrimental to the company. Stress require money. Stress is related to the heart attack, gastritis, and other disease. So kawan saya pernah ada gastrik disebabkan oleh stres. Kita biasa stres, biasanya sakit kepala, BP, blood pressure akan naik dan sebagainya. Tapi kawan saya ni memang dia stres dan dia jadi gastrik. So lagi teruk lah. So stress required money, 40 million lost man day annually are stress related. Ni dekat UK lah. Stress result increases alcohol intake, absenteeism, lebih kurang 700 million pound per year. Ni kajian dekat UK. The cost of the loss of an executive to the heart attack due to stress is equivalent to USD 600,000 by Xerox USA. composition paid out the stress-related cases total 15% of the composition cases in USA. Dekat Malaysia kita baru nak bermula. Kita tak pernah quantify pun berapa banyak yang kita bayar, berapa banyak yang kita bagi pampasan composition berkaitan dengan mental health. Tapi hakikatnya saya boleh cakap dekat Malaysia ni kadang-kadang bila ada orang mental health, dia ada problem mental health, stress dan sebagainya, orang akan cakap dia ni ada masalah gangguan makhluk halus. Sedangkan benda-benda tu sebenarnya mental health juga adalah salah satu penyakit. Bila penyakit, dia boleh diubati dan dia boleh dirawat. Right. Definition of stress. Stress is pressure that is felt by an individual and his or her reaction as a result of it. Increases in the stress for the individual may be too much for him or her to bear. Who are the risks of the occupational stress? Everyone is susceptible to stress. Personality type A, those dealing with the public, for example, police, nurses, doctor and so on. SHO juga stress sebab dia kena menghadap DOSH, dia kena menghadap worker dan sebagainya. Working method, employees with the monotonous work. Yang ini very subjective, saya dah bincang tadi. So, occupational stressor, so stressor is support, task, role, environment, shift work, security and change, organization, rules and regulation. So, stress model, normally occupation, primary assessment ataupun secondary assessment. So internal source, datang daripada skill to the content, they handle problem, skill to control emotion, occupational skill, social skill, external source from the job control, social support and so on. So short-term reaction towards stress, physiology, psychology, a part of behavior, dan juga long-term reaction towards stress, isu pada psikologi dan juga fisiologi, part of behavior. So reaction towards stress, physiology, high in the short term, high pulse, blood pressure, adrenaline and cortical level. So the form long time psychosomatic symptom, high blood pressure, gastritis, a part of psychology, mental fatigue, frustration, anger, distracted, for short term. For the long term, depression, nervous, bluntness, dissatisfied, dan tapi untuk perempuan yang ada PMS itu bukanlah termasuk dalam tapi kita boleh ambil jugalah a part of waktu dia period and so on tu, dia mungkin akan stress, tapi bukanlah isu mental workload sebenarnya. Behavior, non-consistent work, performance, lack of concentration, akan buat mistake dan sebagainya. So for the long term, increases intake of the nicotine, alcohol, pills, absenteeism, change of work. Sekarang ni dah ramai layan kopi. Kopi memang ada chemical yang memang untuk expose dalam lama dan banyak, bahayalah. Right. So effect of the stress towards the organization, non-harmonious working relation, low morale, reduced quality, reduced productivity, increased absenteeism, late to work. Mungkin boleh jadi juga tak nak pergi, increased absenteeism, datang kerja lambat, tak nak buat kerja dan sebagainya. So increases rate of accident, increases rate of diseases, increase turnover, increase number of the work wanting to the resign. Sebab tu bila kita tengok organisation yang baik, turnover pekerja masuk dan keluar tu sangat rendah. Sebab masing-masing sayang bekerja. Right? General principle to overcome stress, tackle the source, not the symptom, accept the stress is an organizational problem and not an individual one, settle taboo problem, involve everyone, realistic approach. Do not try too many method at the one time. Contohnya company set up KPI yang memang sebelum ni tak pernah pun, tiba-tiba KPI yang sangat tak pernah buat. So itu adalah salah satu part mengapa boleh jadi stres. So stress intervention approach boleh dalam bentuk organizational dan juga boleh berbentuk dalam individual approach. So kalau organizational, so kita identify stress, action, example, review management style, work rotation. Mungkin ada orang dia tak suka duduk ke pejabat saja, dia akan stres, dia tak nak menghadap komputer, mungkin dia ada waktu dia pergi keluar, dia memantau dan sebagainya. So mungkin style yang macam tu. Ada a part of individual approach, mungkin eliminate the source of the stress, action, example, counselling. So Malaysia masih lagi ada tabu berkaitan dengan counselling ataupun jumpa psikiatrik. Sebenarnya tak ada masalah pun. Bila jumpa kaunselor, jumpa psikiatrik, bukan bermaksud dia ada masalah, tetapi dia cuba menyelesaikan masalah. Cuma orang Malaysia ni bila jumpa je, mesti dia ni ada problem. Sebenarnya tak. So, management individual approach, alter it, avoid it, accept it. So, kalau boleh kita ubah, kita ubah. Kalau tak boleh, kita elakkan ataupun kita receive je lah. Develop defense, change the perception of the stress, intervention into strategies of the individual stress, monitoring of the stress symptom. Boleh guna DAS21 ataupun beberapa tools yang lain untuk kita pastikan kita tidak berada dalam stress. Increase defense and analyzing source of the stress. Mungkin kita kena cari tempat orang meluah perasaan, kita kena cari source of the stress dan sebagainya lah. Social skill, assertive training, problem solving. Kalau perlu team building. Kalau katalah ada bos yang toxic, so kena bagi tahu. Kadang-kadang dia rasa betul, tapi sebenarnya dia tak betul. Right. Dan paling baik nak tegur bos adalah dalam mesyuarat sebenarnya. Bila dalam mesyuarat, kalau kita cakap, dia tak boleh marah kita sebab kita bercakap berdasarkan apa yang berlaku. Kalau kita cakap kat luar, mungkin dia boleh ignore dan dia boleh terasa lah. And then intervention strategy for the individual stress, accepting stress and changing reaction, cognitive behavior technique. Mungkin ada yang belajar pasal NLP, neuro language program dan sebagainya, boleh gunalah. So macam mana nak menukar daripada cabaran kepada opportunity, kepada peluang, cabaran kepada peluang. Alright. Lowering level of the sensitivity to the stress, healthy lifestyle, relaxation, praying, meditation, healing. So ada juga pejabat yang memang ada slot untuk bersukan, healing dan sebagainya. Action plan, establish discussion group, evaluate current situation, group problem, identify source, evaluate existing solution, establish policy and program, implement policy and program, monitor and evaluate policy and program. That's all for today. So, ada apa nak tanya ataupun kita nak discuss?
Prof,
Ya.
untuk yang ini yang case tadi itu yang pairing, tugasan untuk pairing, yang itu submitnya macam mana tu, Prof? Individual kah atau macam mana?
Dia kalau
Atau
buat pairing,
seorang saya boleh?
hantar pairing lah. Ada nama dua-dua.
Oh,
So,
tapi maksud dia wakil seorang tu boleh hantar lah macam tu.
ya.
Oh, tak perlu dua-dua lah.
Tak perlu dua-dua. Sama macam grouping. Grouping satu je.
Okay, thank you, Prof.
Alright, okay. Alright, kalau tak ada apa-apa, kita bersurai. Selamat.
Doktor, jap.
Jap.
Ada lagi
Okay.
satu.
Ya.
Yang tadi kata kalau grouping hantar satu je kan, tapi kita upload dekat dalam Urox lah.
Ya. Dan kalau boleh, email juga kat saya sebenarnya.
Oh, okay. Email
Paling senang.
nanti.
Nanti saya share saya punya email, so boleh email kepada saya in case kalau Europe ada problem, saya ada salinan You all lah.
Tak adalah sebab risau sebab UROX kan semua individual ada yang apa term paper ni semua kan. Takut nanti kalau tak hantar nanti dia akan keluar dekat dalam sistem tu, kita tak hantar.
Tak apa, nanti I akan allow untuk macam tu lah, tak ada masalah. So it's okay, no problem. Tapi nanti saya akan bagi email in case kalau ada apa-apa, hantar salinan dekat saya juga. So saya boleh in case kalau saya tak boleh nak buka Euros ataupun saya ada problem, saya ada supplementary lah. Alright, okay.
Okay, thank you.
Doktor,
Yap.
apa ni berkenaan dengan midterm, just nak clarify balik, adakah test tu dalam tempoh 3 jam ataupun dalam tempoh 1 hari?
Okay.
Yang pada 21 hari bulan tu.
Nanti saya akan bincang dengan SKC untuk buka pada tarikh tersebut, pada 21. Sepanjang
Maksudnya?
21 hari bulan tu boleh jawab dalam tempoh, kalau saya tak silap 1 jam je.
1 jam.
1 jam je. Tapi saya galakkan sebab you all punya jadual memang waktu saya adalah 21 hari bulan, waktu 8.30 malam sampai pukul 11.30. So in other way, boleh jawab pada bila-bila masa, tapi sekali je login.
Oh, okay. So doktor punya advice?
Jawablah ketika waktu kelas.
Dalam kelas, waktu kelas.
Waktu kelas lah.
Okay doktor. Okay doktor, clear doktor.
Alright, okay. So ada apa-apa masalah, boleh bertanya dengan saya. Tak ada masalah. Boleh WhatsApp saya. It's okay, no problem. Dan seperti yang kita janjikan, kita hantar assignment dalam Eurox tu by 31 kan?
21st.
So itulah. So saya mengharapkan saya tak kena kejar you all. So saya boleh bagi markah dengan aman damai. Dan insyaAllah kalau tak ada apa-apa, mungkin semua orang boleh dapat A lah. Sama-sama macam itulah. Alright.
InsyaAllah. Terima kasih Prof.
Alright.
Thank you, Prof.
So soalan tak susah pun. Kalau you all tengok kita punya assignment pun tak susah, kita punya midterm pun tak susah, final pun tak susah. Risau.